Welcome to A Slice with Dice, a podcast exploring the ideas, pressures, and possibilities shaping how we learn, lead, and grow. I'm Corey Alderdice. For over 20 years, my work has lived at the intersection of gifted education, leadership development, and school culture, supporting students as they find their strengths, educators as they stretch their thinking, and schools as they build pathways that expand opportunity. Ready to dive in? Here's this week's Slice. Over the past several weeks, schools across Arkansas, in Pulaski County and Garland County, and in other communities around the state, have experienced student walkouts and protests related to recent actions by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE. For some families, these moments are inspiring. For others, they're unsettling. And for school leaders, they are often some of the most complex and emotionally difficult days of the year, perhaps even of an entire career in school leadership. And so I want to talk about that complexity. Not to argue the policy debate around immigration enforcement, not to wade into partisan trenches, but to help students, parents, and community members better understand what these moments feel like from inside a school. And I can speak about that now with a slightly different vantage point. I'm no longer serving as executive director of ASMSA. I'm not the primary respondent to these issues anymore, but I have lived through them. And 1 week in March of 2018 remains one of the most difficult of my professional life. But let me begin with the legal baseline. In 1969, in Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District, the United States Supreme Court famously wrote that students do not, quote, shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. And that sentence is often quoted, and it should be. It affirms something important. Students are citizens. They do not become voiceless simply because they enter a public institution. What is often forgotten is the rest of the holding. The court also made clear that schools may regulate speech that would materially and substantially disrupt the work and discipline of the school. And that phrase, materially and substantially disrupt, has become the bright line for administrators for more than half a century. So when students organize a walkout, the question for a principal or a school leader is not whether the issue matters. It is not whether the students are sincere. It is not whether the administrator personally agrees. The question is, does this materially and substantially disrupt the learning environment? And how do we apply our rules consistently? Because consistency is the key. What we apply to one protest must be applied to all. If we excuse one political action, we must be prepared to excuse the opposite viewpoint as well. If we discipline one walkout, we must discipline another. Because public institutions do not have the luxury of selective alignment. And that reality became even more complicated in Arkansas with the passage of the 2025 Access Act. Among its provisions were limitation on schools' ability to provide excused absences for political engagement and similar activities. In many respects, the legislation followed events in prior years, including students from Little Rock Central High School testifying against the LEARNS Act in 2023, and some school districts granting excused leave to educators to attend and testify at the Capitol on that same topic. The Access Act narrowed the discretion that districts previously exercised in those situations. Now, whether one agrees with that legislative choice or not, the implication is clear. Local administrators now operate within tighter statutory guardrails when it comes to excusing absences tied to political advocacy. And that matters. Because when a school says a walkout will be counted as an absence, that decision may not be ideological. It may be statutory. It may be policy. It may be the only lawful path available. And so that brings me back to 2018. In February of that year, a gunman killed 17 people at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Just weeks earlier, there had been a shooting at Marshall County High School in Kentucky. And for me, that issue was not abstract. In December of 1997, my first cousin was in the prayer circle at Heath High School in Paducah, Kentucky, when that shooting occurred. I remember sitting in sophomore English class that morning in 1997, terrified, before cell phones, before text messages, wondering if she was alive. We had just spoken about her participation in that faith-based group at a family Christmas gathering days before. So gun violence in schools was not theoretical to me. And when the national student walkouts were planned in March of 2018, I understood the emotion. At ASMSA, we had been listening carefully. We had asked ourselves, are our students going to plan something? 2 days before the scheduled national walkout, a student who did not even have class during the planned period organized an event on campus. So we met in good faith. We sat down with the student and with the Student Government Association Executive Board. We discussed timing. We discussed alternative formats. We acknowledged the pain driving the moment. We asked whether there were ways to honor the cause without disrupting instruction. And in good faith, the students chose to proceed alongside their peers nationwide. But our handbook was clear. Students more than 15 minutes late to class were counted absent. It was a level 1 infraction, procedural, not punitive, but it was still an absence. So we applied the handbook. And the reaction? Well, it was swift. Alumni, parents, engaged citizens, and a progressive publication in Arkansas whose editor emailed me directly and said, I expected a little better enlightenment from ASMSA of all places. So what stung about that moment was this. My personal convictions were closely aligned with the students' concerns. But my role required me to act not as a private citizen, but as a steward of a public institution funded by the General Assembly and accountable to stakeholders across the political spectrum. That tension is real. It is especially real in public schools, colleges, and specialized programs that rely heavily on legislative appropriations. The public owns these institutions, and the public regularly does not agree with itself. So what should students understand? Well, first, your engagement matters. Civic participation is not a nuisance. It is part of democracy. Your willingness to speak, to organize, to show up, that is something to be proud of. But understand this. When you ask your school to excuse your absence or support a protest, you are asking an institution to make a determination that must be applied universally. You are asking leaders to consider statutory limits, board policies, community expectations, and precedent. If you want to advocate effectively, engage your administration early. Ask how you can express your views within policy. Offer solutions that minimize disruption. Help them help you. And to parents, I understand the instinct to demand alignment, but remember that the principal's job is to not signal agreement, it is to apply processes, and this is the key word, fairly. If your child is counted absent for participating in a walkout or further discipline, that decision may not reflect opposition to the cause, it likely reflects adherence to law. To my fellow educators and school leaders, these weeks are never easy and will never be easy, but our credibility rests not on which side we favor privately, it rests on procedural fairness. But here's the thing. Public institutions are designed, I think, in part to absorb criticism. That is one of their democratic functions. Schools, especially, become stages upon which society's tensions are played out. We will be criticized for enforcing policy. We will be criticized for not enforcing it. That criticism is not proof of failure. It is evidence that we are operating at the very center of civic life. And so we return to that bright line. Students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. But neither do schools surrender their responsibility to maintain order, apply law, and ensure that one student's expression does not substantially disrupt another student's learning. Those principles coexist in tension. I celebrate students who care enough to engage. I celebrate their desire to shape the world they are inheriting. But the measure of a school's integrity is not whether it validates one viewpoint. It's whether it applies its rules consistently across all viewpoints. Outcomes will often be misunderstood. Motives will be questioned. Decisions, well, they will be criticized. But fairness, consistent, process-driven fairness, well, that's the goal. And in public education, that is often the hardest standard of all. A Slice with Dice is a production of Aldercube. Thanks for making time to reflect with me. If you're finding value in these episodes, I hope you'll subscribe and help spread the word. Until next time, lead boldly, listen closely, and keep pushing forward. I'll see you then.